The maid's toddler pulled off Billionaire watch. He had no idea she just saved him. Marcus Hale had not slept in 36 hours. That was not unusual for a man who had built a $4 billion technology empire from a dorm room, a stolen Wi-Fi connection, and a stubborn refusal to accept the word impossible. At 33, Marcus wore exhaustion the way other men wore cologne, so consistently that people around him had simply stopped noticing it. His executive assistant, Dana, had learned to read the particular shade of gray beneath his eyes. His driver, Roberto, had memorized the exact angle at which Marcus slumped in the back seat when he had crossed the threshold from tired to dangerously depleted. His personal chef prepared meals at all hours because Marcus's hunger had no relationship whatsoever with the clock on the wall. But this exhaustion was different. This was the kind that lived in the bones, not the muscles. The kind that no amount of sleep could fully reach. Marcus stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his Pacific Heights mansion in San Francisco, watching the fog roll in from the bay like a slow, gray tide, and felt the particular hollowness of a man who had everything the world said should make a person happy, and felt, despite all of it, profoundly, terrifyingly alone. 3 days ago, his doctors had delivered news that rewired something fundamental inside him. He hadn't told anyone yet. Not Dana, not Roberto, not his mother in Phoenix, who called every Sunday and always said, "You work too hard, baby," in a voice that carried all the helplessness of a woman who loved someone she could no longer reach. The news sat in the center of his chest like a stone, the kind that doesn't crush you all at once, but wears you down slowly, steadily, until one morning you wake up and realize you've been bent so long you've forgotten what straight felt like. His heart. Specifically, his heart valve. A congenital defect, the cardiologist had explained with the practiced gentleness of someone who delivered devastating information regularly enough to have developed a technique for it. Caught early enough to treat. Requiring surgery. Serious. Not immediately life-threatening, but the kind of thing that demanded immediate, serious attention. The stress levels you're maintaining, the doctor had said, studying Marcus over the top of his glasses, are accelerating the deterioration significantly. Mr. Hale, your heart is literally working too hard. Marcus had almost laughed at that. His heart was working too hard. Everything about him worked too hard. That was the whole story of his life, compressed into a forward medical observation. He turned away from the window and looked at his left wrist. The watch was a Patek Philippe Nautilus, reference 5726A, in stainless steel with a blue gradient dial. It had been a gift to himself on the day Hale Technologies went public, the day a kid who had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Detroit with a single mother who cleaned other people's houses became, on paper at least, a billionaire. He remembered standing in the store, still not quite believing the numbers in his bank account were real, touching the cool steel of the case with something close to reverence. He had bought it as proof. Proof that all of it was real. Proof that he had actually made it. That watch was worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $80,000. More than that, it was fitted, seamlessly, invisibly, with a device that his security team had quietly installed 6 months ago, after the third credible threat on his life had convinced even Marcus, who was pathologically dismissive of personal risk, that certain precautions were not optional. Embedded in the case back behind the movement was a microtransmitter, ultra-thin, invisible to the naked eye, completely undetectable unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. The transmitter was connected to a modified lithium cell, and that lithium cell, according to a security briefing Marcus had half listened to and almost entirely forgotten, had a hairline fracture in its casing. A fracture that, under sustained pressure or proximity to certain electromagnetic frequencies, had a small but non-zero chance of generating enough heat to cause a thermal event. Marcus did not know about the fracture. His security team had discovered it 48 hours ago during a routine diagnostic sweep. They had flagged it as a priority concern and sent an urgent message to Marcus's secure device. Marcus had not checked his secure device in 4 days because Marcus had been sitting with his cardiologist's words rattling around the empty rooms of his chest and had been, for the first time in his adult life, unable to make himself care about work. The message sat unread. The watch stayed on his wrist. He wore it to the kitchen at 7 in the morning to pour himself coffee he wouldn't taste. He wore it into the living room where he collapsed on the leather sofa and stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time he had felt genuinely happy rather than merely successful. He wore it while he thought about his mother's hands, red and rough from years of scrubbing other people's floors, and the silent promise he had made to those hands, as a 12-year-old boy watching her come home too tired to eat, that he would make all of that sacrifice mean something. He had made it mean something. He had made it mean billions of dollars and a mansion in Pacific Heights and a watch worth more than the house he grew up in. But his mother still called every Sunday and said, "You work too hard, baby," and he still didn't know how to tell her that she was right, or that success had a way of building beautiful, impenetrable walls around a person, or that he was sitting in a house full of everything and running out of time. Rosa Mendez arrived at 8 o'clock, as she did every weekday morning. She was 41 years old, with dark eyes that held the particular quiet dignity of a woman who had survived more than she ever talked about. She had worked for Marcus for 2 years, cleaning, organizing, maintaining the silent order that his life required, but that he himself had no capacity to create. She was efficient, discreet, and possessed of the kind of steady competence that Marcus, whose entire professional life was built on recognizing talent, had always respected. What was unusual about this particular Tuesday morning was that Rosa's regular childcare arrangement had fallen through without warning. Her neighbor, who normally watched 3-year-old Lily while Rosa worked, had a family emergency. Rosa had called twice, apologized profusely, offered to make other arrangements, offered to come on her day off to compensate. Marcus, whose ability to absorb logistical information was severely compromised by the stone still sitting in his chest, had said, "It's fine. Bring her." He had not thought much about it. He poured his coffee, stared at his watch, and waited for the fog to lift. In 40 minutes, a 3-year-old girl named Lily Mendez would toddle across his living room floor with bare feet and curious eyes and reach up with small, certain hands toward the gleaming thing on the sad man's wrist, and she would do what only the very young, the very innocent, and the completely unafraid can do. She would change everything. Lily Mendez had opinions. This was something anyone who spent more than 4 minutes in her company discovered quickly and completely. She was 3 years old and 34 inches tall and roughly 28 pounds, and she approached the world with the sovereign confidence of someone who had not yet been taught to make herself smaller for the comfort of others. She liked the color orange with a devotion that bordered on philosophical. She disliked shoes with the same intensity, which was why she had already removed both of them in the back seat of Rosa's aging Honda and left them there without a trace of guilt. She loved dogs and bubbles and the sound of rain on windows and her worn stuffed rabbit named, with 3-year-old simplicity, Bunny. She was also, as her mother knew and quietly marveled at daily, extraordinarily perceptive for her age. Not in the way that people meant when they called a child smart, though Lily was that too, with a vocabulary that surprised strangers and a memory for faces and feelings that was almost uncanny. It was something older than intelligence, something that lived below language. Lily noticed things. Not the grand, obvious things that everyone noticed, but the small, hidden things, the slight tremor in a voice, the way a person's shoulders held a grief they weren't speaking aloud, the particular quality of silence in a room where someone had been crying. She had her father's eyes, Rosa sometimes thought, not in color, but in depth. In the way they looked at the world like they were reading something written underneath the surface of it. Rosa had explained the situation in the car with the careful simplicity she used when she needed Lily to genuinely understand something rather than merely comply with it. "We're going to Mr. Marcus's house today, Mija. Remember I told you about where Mama works?" "The big house," Lily confirmed, from the back seat, examining Bunny's ear with scientific focus.
Yes.
The big house. Now, Mr. Marcus is very important and very busy, and he's going to let us be there even though it's not really allowed, which is very kind of him. So I need you to be extra gentle and extra quiet. Can you do that for me? Lily had looked up from Bunny with those dark, old soul eyes and said, with perfect seriousness, "Is the man sad, Mama?" Rosa had paused at a red light and looked in the rearview mirror. "What makes you ask that, baby?" Lily had shrugged in the enormous, full body way of toddlers. "I don't know."
Is he?
Rosa had not answered, because the truth was that she had noticed something in Marcus's face over the past week, something shuttered and heavy that hadn't been there before, and she didn't know how to explain to a 3-year-old that yes, sometimes very rich people were sad in very complicated ways that didn't have simple solutions. So she had said, "Mr. Marcus is fine, he's just busy." And Lily had accepted this with the diplomatic grace of a child who knows she is not being given the full story, but chooses not to press. The mansion hit Lily the way it hit everyone on first encounter, with a kind of breathless, disorienting grandeur. 14-foot ceilings. Marble floors in the entryway that reflected light like still water. Art on the walls that Lily stared at with a frank, uncomplicated assessment of someone unbothered by the pressure to appear sophisticated. A kitchen that was larger than their entire apartment. Lily walked through it all with her bare feet and her stuffed rabbit and her wide-open eyes, and Rosa followed her with a mixture of maternal vigilance and quiet pride, because Lily touched nothing she wasn't supposed to touch, asked permission before sitting on the living room sofa, and said please and thank you, with the automatic ease of a child in whom courtesy had been installed at a cellular level. Marcus was on the sofa when they came in. He had barely moved from the position Rosa had found him in upon arrival, slightly reclined, coffee gone cold beside him, staring at the ceiling with the expression of a man engaged in a very long and very private argument with himself. He acknowledged Rosa's presence with a small nod. He acknowledged Lily's with something slightly more, a moment of focus, a reflexive softening that happened in the face of very young children whether you intended it or not.
"Hi," he said.
His voice was rougher than usual. Underslept. Lily, standing at the edge of the area rug with Bunny tucked under her arm, looked at him with those deep, reading eyes.
"Hi," she said back.
Then, after a brief evaluative pause, "Your socks don't match." Marcus looked down. She was right. One sock was charcoal gray. One was black. He hadn't noticed. Something that was almost a smile moved across his face. "The first one in 3 days." "You're right. They don't." "That's okay," Lily told him generously. "Sometimes Mama's socks don't match too. She says it means you're thinking about important things." Rosa, from across the room where she had begun her work with practiced quiet, closed her eyes briefly and smiled to herself. Marcus sat with that for a moment. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lily Rosa Mendez." "I'm 3. How old are you?" 33. Lily considered this enormous number with appropriate gravity. "That's very old," she said, not unkindly. "It feels that way sometimes," Marcus agreed. And just like that, with the inexplicable ease that children and exhausted people sometimes find in each other, the ice broke. Lily settled herself on the rug a respectful distance from the sofa and began a complex imaginative game involving Bunny, 2 decorative throw pillows, and a narrative that Marcus gathered involved a rabbit who is also a doctor. He watched her from the sofa with the unfocused, almost meditative attention of someone whose mind has been wound so tight for so long that it doesn't quite know what to do when it's allowed to simply rest. He was watching her when it happened. Lily's game had migrated, as toddler games do, with no apparent logic or warning. One moment Bunny, the doctor, was treating a pillow patient. The next, Lily was standing directly beside the sofa, at Marcus's left side, at precisely the height where his outstretched arm rested along the cushion. She was looking at the watch with the pure, uncomplicated covetousness of a child who has spotted something shiny and wonderful. "Pretty," she announced. "Thank you," Marcus said automatically. Lily reached out and touched the crystal face of the watch with one fingertip. Then, with the decisive, unself-conscious action of a child who sees something interesting and has not yet learned that touching is a question rather than an answer, she wrapped both small hands around the watch and tugged. Lily. Rosa started from across the room. But the clasp, which was a complex butterfly deployant that Marcus opened and closed 100 times a day without conscious thought, gave under Lily's grip in a way it would not have given under an adult's, because Lily had grabbed it at exactly the angle that depressed both release buttons simultaneously, and the watch slipped off Marcus's wrist and into her hands with a soft, definitive click. She held it up, triumphant, face radiant with the particular joy of a toddler who has successfully done a thing. Rosa was already crossing the room, mortified, apology forming on her lips. But Marcus was sitting up, straight, fully awake in a way he hadn't been all morning. Not because of the watch being removed, but because of what he felt in the half-second of its removal. A heat. Faint, but distinct. Not from his skin. From the watch itself. From the case back, where it had rested against the pulse point of his inner wrist for the past 36 hours. He sat very still. He looked at the watch in Lily's outstretched, offering hands. She was already giving it back, her instinct for generosity overcoming even the joy of acquisition, and felt the faint warmth radiating from the metal case, and felt something cold move through his chest that had nothing to do with his heart condition. He thought about the security message he hadn't read. He thought about Roberto mentioning in passing 3 days ago that the tech team had flagged something. He thought about the way his wrist, now bare, felt cooler than it should have in a room this warm. And Marcus Hale, who had survived 14-hour days and hostile takeover attempts and 3 credible death threats, went very quiet and very still and picked up his phone with hands that were not entirely steady and opened his secure messages for the first time in 4 days. The subject line read, "Urgent. Immediate removal required. Watch transmitter thermal event risk." The breath he took was the kind that a person takes when they realize something enormous has shifted on an axis they couldn't see. He looked at Lily, who was now examining Bunny with serene contentment. The watch returned to Marcus's palm, the whole incident already filed away in the archive of Toddler adventures. He looked at his watch, sitting warm in his hand. And for the first time in 3 days, the stone in his chest moved. The next 4 hours were a controlled storm of activity that Lily observed from the sideline with calm, well-fed interest. Rosa had produced a small container of goldfish crackers from her bag, and Lily sat cross-legged on the rug eating them one by one with methodical satisfaction while men in dark clothing came and went, and the pretty watch disappeared into a padded case, and Marcus spoke in low, rapid sentences on his phone. She did not know what was happening.
She didn't need to.
What Lily knew was that the sad man was standing straighter than he had been before. That his voice, which had been low and far away when she first heard it, had become sharp and present. That the quality of the room had changed in the way a room changes when a window is opened, something moving through it that hadn't been there before. She offered him a goldfish cracker when he sat back down beside her on the rug. He took it absently and ate it. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome," she said, with great dignity. Marcus looked at this small person beside him, at her neat braids with the orange barrettes that matched her shirt, at her bare feet with their perfectly round toenails painted a chipped, cheerful pink, at the way she held her rabbit with such uncomplicated tenderness, and felt something move through him that he did not have immediate language for. The security team had arrived within 22 minutes of his call. The watch had been assessed and confirmed. The fracture in the battery casing had worsened significantly, likely due to the electromagnetic interference from Marcus's phone and laptop combined with the heat generated by his elevated body temperature over 36 sleepless hours. Left on his wrist for another 12 to 24 hours, under the same conditions, the thermal event probability had risen to what the team lead described, with professional understatement, as a range we consider unacceptable. Unacceptable. That was the word they used. What the word meant, Translated out of security speak and into plain human language, was that Marcus had been wearing a slow emergency on his wrist for days, and had not known, and would not have known, because he had been so deep inside the cave of his own fear and grief and exhaustion that the external world had narrowed to a pinhole. A small hand had reached through that pinhole. He sat beside Lily on the rug and thought about the randomness of it, the specific, improbable chain of circumstances that had produced this moment. Rose's childcare falling through. Marcus's offhand permission. Lily's bare feet carrying her across the marble. The particular angle of a toddler's grip on a butterfly clasp. The precise moment of removal, no sooner, no later. The warmth he had felt on suddenly bare skin. Any one of those links removed, and the chain didn't hold. He looked at his wrist, bare now, the pale strip of skin where the watch had lived for 36 hours, and thought about how invisible danger could be. How perfectly, completely invisible. How a person could walk through the world carrying something that was quietly threatening to combust, and smile at people and take meetings and stare at the ceiling at 3 a.m, and never know. And then he thought about his heart, about the defect,
About the stone in his chest.
same thing, different form, something carried unknowingly, invisibly, quietly gathering heat. He had been so afraid of the cardiologist's news, so privately, paralyzingly afraid, that he had not told a single person. He had sat in the silence of not telling for 3 days and let the fear expand in the dark, as unexpressed fears always do, filling the available space, becoming larger and more absolute and more final than it actually was. He had believed, in the wordless logic of his private terror, that not telling made it less real. That if he kept the walls high enough and thick enough, the truth couldn't quite reach him. But walls don't protect you from what's already inside. "Hey," he said to Lily, who was in the process of feeding Bunny an imaginary goldfish cracker. "Can I ask you something?" Lily looked up with the attentive seriousness she brought to adult questions, which she sensed deserved more care than questions from other children. "Okay," she agreed. "When you're scared of something," Marcus said carefully, "what you do?" Lily thought about this with her whole face, brow furrowed, mouth slightly to one side, the complete, unself-conscious concentration of a child who hasn't learned to perform thinking rather than actually do it. "I tell Mama," she said finally, as if this were the most obvious possible answer. As if any other response were nearly incomprehensible. "And then what happens?" "Then it gets smaller," Lily said simply. She held up Bunny for illustration. "I told Mama I was scared of the drain in the bathtub. She turned the lights on. Now it's just a drain." She looked at Marcus with those old eyes. "Scary things get smaller when you say them." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. In 33 years, he had built companies and managed thousands of people and made decisions worth billions of dollars and navigated every kind of professional crisis with a calm that others found almost superhuman. He had mentored young executives. He had given commencement speeches. He had been profiled in magazines that called him visionary. He had never once learned what this 3-year-old already knew in the marrow of her small bones, that the antidote to fear is not silence. That things get smaller when you say them. He looked across the room at Rosa, who was polishing the kitchen counter with a focused, graceful efficiency she always brought to her work, and felt a wave of something he couldn't fully name. Not quite gratitude, not quite shame, not quite wonder, but made of all three. This woman came to his house every weekday. She moved through his life with quiet competence, maintaining the order that held his days together, and he had never, not once, asked her about her own life with anything approaching genuine curiosity. He knew her name. He paid her salary. He said good morning and thank you, and was, he believed, perfectly respectful. But he did not know her. He did not know that she had immigrated from Oaxaca when she was 19 with $40 and a cousin's address, and a determination so fierce it was almost terrifying. He did not know that she had put herself through night school while working double shifts, or that Lily's father had left when Lily was 4 months old, or that Rosa had not cried about it in front of her daughter a single time. Not once, because she had decided that Lily's world would be built on solid ground regardless of what it cost her personally to lay the foundation. He did not know that Rosa read to Lily every single night, never skipping it regardless of how exhausted she was, because she had decided that her daughter would have a rich inner world even if the outer one was tight. He did not know that Lily's extraordinary emotional intelligence, the thing that had just saved his life, was not an accident but a harvest. He was sitting on the floor of his living room, eating goldfish crackers with the harvest of someone else's extraordinary love, and he had not known. He had not known because he had not asked, and he had not asked because the walls he'd built to protect himself also blocked his view. He picked up his phone. He called his mother. She answered on the second ring, the way she always did, as if some maternal frequency kept her close to the phone when he might need her. "Marcus? Baby, it's the middle of the week." "I know," he said. His voice cracked slightly at the edges.
Mom.
"I need to tell you something." He told her about his heart. He listened to the sound of her breath catching and then steadying, the way her breath always steadied. This woman who had held herself together through everything, who had bent but never broken. He listened to her say, "Okay, we're going to be okay," in that voice, the one that had been his first and most fundamental experience of love and safety. And the stone in his chest cracked open. Not in a terrible way. In the way of thawing. In the way of light getting in. Across the room, Lily had resumed her game with Bunny. She was not paying attention to Marcus. She did not know what she had set in motion. She was 3 years old, and the world was a place of goldfish crackers and orange barrettes and stuffed rabbits who were also doctors. But in the life of the man on the floor, something had been removed that should have been removed days ago, something that had been quietly building heat, quietly threatening, quietly waiting, and the wrist it had circled was bare and cool and free. Marcus Hale did not return to work the following Monday. This was, by every measure of his pre-Tuesday life, unthinkable. He had not voluntarily missed a Monday since he'd founded the company at 24. Mondays were sacred to him in the particular way that something becomes sacred when it is both necessary and dreaded, the weekly rededication to the altar of building, achieving, pushing. His executive team had a standing Monday morning meeting at 7:30 that Marcus ran with the focused energy of a man who treated rest as a personal failing. Instead, on that Monday, Marcus was sitting across from his cardiologist discussing surgical timelines. This was also the first appointment at which he had brought someone with him. His mother, Eleanor Hale, 71 years old, with Marcus's same jaw and considerably more of his good sense, sat beside him in the blue plastic chair and held his hand and asked the questions he was too proud to ask himself, and Marcus let her, because somewhere between Tuesday's goldfish crackers and Thursday's phone call, he had reached the end of the particular pride that had been slowly, privately destroying him. "The surgery has a very high success rate," the cardiologist said. 96% of patients with this procedure return to full, unrestricted activity. "When can he go back to work?" Eleanor asked. "We recommend 4 to 6 weeks of recovery." Eleanor turned and looked at Marcus with an expression that communicated a great deal without any words. Marcus met her eyes and nodded once, which communicated that he understood. "Okay," he said. "Let's schedule it." He called Dana from the car and told her to reschedule his calendar for 6 weeks. The silence on the other end of the phone had the particular quality of a sound Dana was deliberately not making. "Of course, Marcus," she said, in a voice held carefully neutral. "I'll take care of it." "Dana."
He paused.
"Have I ever asked about your family? What you do on weekends? Anything like that?" A longer silence. "No," she said honestly. "I'm sorry about that," Marcus said. "That changes." He meant it. The surgery was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In those 3 weeks, Marcus did something he had not done since the early days of the company, when it was small enough that human connection was not a luxury but a necessity. He paid attention to the people around him. Not in the managed, professional way of a CEO who understands that employee satisfaction affects productivity. In the actual way. The way where you ask and then listen to the answer, and let the answer mean something. He learned that Roberto, his driver, had a son who was applying to engineering programs and needed a recommendation letter from someone in the industry. Marcus wrote him one. He learned that the chef, Antoine, had a culinary concept he'd been quietly developing for years, but never had the capital to test. Marcus connected him with 3 restaurant investors. He learned that Dana was caring for her mother, who had Parkinson's, and that the unpredictable nature of her mother's needs had been creating a quiet, invisible strain that Dana had managed entirely alone because she had never wanted Marcus to see it as a performance problem. He restructured her schedule to be flexible without any reduction in compensation. He did it in a 5-minute conversation and then moved on because the point was not to receive gratitude, but to fix a thing that should have been fixed long ago. And then there was Rosa. He approached it carefully because Rosa was not a woman who accepted gestures easily. She had the self-possessed dignity of someone who has built her life on her own terms and has learned to be quietly suspicious of charity dressed up as generosity. He did not want to offend her. He did not want to make her feel like a recipient of pity or a beneficiary of his guilt. He wanted, as much as possible, to simply be fair, to look clearly at the imbalance and address it without drama or performance. He asked her to sit down over coffee one morning, the week after the Tuesday with the watch. Rosa sat across from him with the particular posture of a woman preparing to defend something, and Marcus recognized it because he had sat that way himself. The careful stillness of someone who is ready for the possibility that this conversation is going to cost them something. "I need to talk to you about something," he said. "And I want you to hear it clearly, because I'm going to say it plainly." Rosa waited. "Last Tuesday," he said, "I found out I'd been wearing a watch with a faulty battery that my security team had identified as a potential thermal risk. The message came through when I was not in a place to receive it. I missed it." He paused. "Lily took the watch off my wrist, which brought the heat to my attention, which made me look at the message." Rosa's expression moved through something, a recognition of realignment, a catching up with what this actually meant. "She did," she said quietly.
"She did," Marcus said.
"And I want to be careful not to make this into a bigger story than it needs to be, because she's 3 years old, and she pulled a shiny thing off a man's wrist, and that's all she knows." But from where I was sitting, he stopped. "Tried again. Rosa, I'd also just gotten some medical news I hadn't told anyone. And watching your daughter, the way she just, without any agenda, without any angle, just walked into my life and was fully herself, something shifted for me. I called my mother. I scheduled the appointments I'd been avoiding." He stopped again. He was not a man accustomed to being imprecise with words. The imprecision embarrassed him slightly. He straightened. "I'm not able to put a dollar value on any of that," he said. "But I can look at the concrete facts, and the concrete fact is that you've worked for me for 2 years, and I have not once paid you what your work is actually worth, and I have not offered you what your situation actually requires, and both of those things are going to change today." He slid a folder across the table. Rosa looked at it without touching it. "Marcus. It's a revised compensation package," he said. "Twice your current rate. Full health insurance for you and Lily. A college fund account in Lily's name that I've already established. And an education assistance benefit that covers tuition and costs if you want to complete a degree." He met her eyes. "You were working on a social work degree when you came to work for me. You stopped when the schedule became incompatible. The schedule can be made compatible." Rosa was very still. "I'm not doing this as a transaction," Marcus said. "I'm doing this because it's right. Because I should have done it 2 years ago, and I was too inside my own head to see what was in front of me. You can say no to any of it. You can say no to all of it. But I needed to say it." Rosa was looking at the folder. Her hands, flat on the table, were very still. When she looked up, her eyes held something complex, the particular emotional amalgam of someone who has survived a long time on their own strength and is not quite sure how to receive an offer of support without losing the thread of that strength. Lily doesn't know what she did, Rosa said finally. Her voice was low and even. I know, Marcus said. Rosa paused, and Marcus saw the flicker of something raw cross her carefully composed face, the involuntary, unguarded expression of a mother thinking about her child. She just liked the shiny thing. She liked the shiny thing, Marcus agreed. And he stopped, reconsidered. When I asked her what she does when she's scared of something, she said she tells you. She said scary things get smaller when you say them. He looked at his bare wrist. He was not wearing a watch, had not worn one since Tuesday, and the bare skin felt like an ongoing revelation.
She's right.
I'd forgotten that. Rosa opened the folder. She read it in silence, with the careful, thorough attention of a woman who has learned never to sign anything she hasn't fully understood. When she finished, she closed it. She looked at the table for a long moment. Yes, she said. Okay. Yes. Marcus exhaled. Thank you, he said, for bringing her. Rosa looked up with those dark, deep eyes, and for the first time in 2 years of professional, respectful distance, she let him see what was underneath them. The years of effort, the love that had built Lily from the ground up, the quiet, immovable determination that had carried them both. She chose the orange barrettes herself, Rosa said. This morning. She always has opinions about her hair. Marcus smiled, a real one, wide and unguarded, the kind that changes the shape of a face. I believe it, he said. The surgery was on a Thursday morning in March, when the fog was thick over the bay and the city was just beginning to think about light. Marcus had thought, in the weeks leading up to it, that he would be afraid, that the fear would reassemble itself, find its way back, settle into the space between midnight and the alarm. But a strange and unexpected calm had taken root in him after the Tuesday of the watch, after the phone call to his mother, after the conversation with Rosa, after the slow and humbling project of dismantling the walls he'd built one honest conversation at a time. The calm was not the absence of feeling. It was the presence of something more solid than fear underneath the feeling. A ground he'd forgotten was there. Eleanor held his hand before the anesthesia. She was wearing the blue cardigan she'd worn to every important moment of his life that she'd been present for, his college graduation, the day the company went public, the first Christmas after his father died, when she had held the family together through pure force of will and perfect mashed potatoes. The blue cardigan was faded now in a way it hadn't been when she bought it, and seeing it, Marcus felt time in a way that was almost physical, the length of it, the weight of it, the astonishing, accumulating gift of it. You ready? She said. Yeah, he said. I actually am. She squeezed his hand once. I know, she said. I can tell. The surgery lasted 4 hours and 20 minutes and went, as his cardiologist would later say, with genuine satisfaction, perfectly. Marcus woke up with a particular groggy, heavy, slightly confused awareness of someone emerging from deep anesthesia into a world that has continued without them, and the first things he was aware of were, in order, the antiseptic smell of the recovery room, the beeping of monitors, his own heartbeat, steadier than it had been, different somehow, the rhythm of something repaired, and then, after a moment, a sound he did not immediately place. A small voice, outside the door, carrying on a detailed explanation to what he gathered was Bunny, about the importance of doctors and how they make people feel better. He found out later that Rosa had brought Lily to the hospital because Lily had understood, in the way that children understand things when they are told them honestly, that the man with the mismatched socks was going to the doctor for something important. She had insisted on bringing a get-well card she had made herself, orange marker on folded paper, with a drawing that Rosa explained was supposed to be a heart but looked more like a tomato wearing a hat. Marcus kept it on his bedside table through the entire recovery. He looked at it often, in the weeks of enforced stillness that followed, weeks that were, despite everything, the most unexpectedly rich of his adult life. His mother stayed for the first 2 weeks, and they talked the way they had not talked since he was a teenager, Late into the evenings, about his father, about the apartment in Detroit, about the things she had hoped for him that were not the things he had achieved, and the things he had achieved that she was prouder of than she'd ever found the words to say. He called Dana every day, not to check on work but to ask how her mother was doing. He video called Roberta's son and spent 2 hours talking him through his engineering school applications. He learned Antoine's culinary concept and spent an afternoon reading about the restaurant industry and connected Antoine to someone who genuinely cared about the idea. He read books. Not the business books that lined the shelves of his office in spines like a curated performance of seriousness, but novels, the kind his English teacher had assigned in high school and that he had skimmed, always, because there was always something more productive to do. He read them slowly, in the afternoon light, with the particular luxury of a man who has been given permission, by his own body and his own crisis, to stop performing productivity. He thought about what it meant to succeed. He had built his entire life on a definition of success that had been constructed in a 2-bedroom apartment in Detroit by a 12-year-old boy watching his mother's tired hands, and while that definition had served him, had driven him through things that would have stopped other people, had given him the specific fuel of determined love, it was also incomplete. It had never been updated. He had achieved the thing the 12-year-old needed to achieve, and then kept running as if the finish line was always one more launch, one more quarter, one more $1 billion further away. He thought about Lily. He thought about her often, in that particular, uncomplicated way that she had installed herself in his thinking, not dramatically, not sentimentally, but with the simple persistence of a truth that doesn't require effort to hold. She had walked into his house with bare feet and a stuffed rabbit, and she had been completely, entirely herself, without management or performance or agenda, and in being that thing she had done what all the carefully managed people in his carefully managed life had not been positioned to do. She had broken through. She had not known she was saving him. She had not been trying to. She had simply seen a shiny thing and wanted it, and had reached for it with both hands with the fearless directness of someone who had not yet learned to want things carefully or quietly or in ways that didn't inconvenience anyone. He wanted, he realized, to be more like that. 6 weeks after the surgery, on a Tuesday because it seemed right, felt like it needed to be a Tuesday, Marcus arrived at his office at 10 instead of 6, in a building full of people who had grown accustomed to his absence and had been. He was now able to see clearly, largely fine without him micromanaging their every decision. He called a company-wide meeting. He stood up in front of 400 faces and he talked about his heart, about the surgery, about the diagnosis, about the weeks of recovery, about the things he had learned in the stillness. He talked about what it had cost him to build this company the way he'd built it, and what it had cost the people around him, and how both of those things were going to change. He announced new policies, real ones, with teeth, not the performative wellness initiatives that most corporations trotted out to appease surveys. Mandatory vacation minimums. Flexible scheduling structures. Mental health resources, with actual funding. A culture audit conducted by external consultants with a mandate to actually report what they found rather than what the executive team wanted to hear. He talked about a 3-year-old girl who had pulled a watch off his wrist. He didn't tell it as a miracle story because he didn't believe it was one, or not exactly. He told it as a story about attention, about how the things that save us are often right in front of us, quiet and small and unpretentious, and we miss them because we've decided that important things announce themselves, that turning points come with music. He told it as a story about a child who was paying attention in the way that very young children pay attention, with their whole selves, without the defensive filtering of experience, and who had therefore seen what he couldn't see, not because she was wiser, but because she was unencumbered. There was a job offer waiting for Rosa when she arrived that following Tuesday. Not a maid's position. A position coordinating the company's newly formed community partnership program, a role that would use her education, her community connections, her extraordinary ability to move through the world with dignity and awareness and genuine care for people. The salary was professional, the hours were reasonable, and the work was real. Rosa read the offer letter in Marcus's kitchen, as she had read the compensation folder weeks before, carefully, completely, without rushing toward a response. When she finished, she looked up. Lily was in the living room, conducting Bunny's medical rounds with great seriousness. "She's going to be somebody," Marcus said, following her gaze. "She already is somebody," Rosa said, with the quiet certainty of a woman who has never for one moment doubted it. "Yes," Marcus said.
"She is.
"She's the person who saved my life without knowing it. That is already somebody." Rosa accepted the offer. On his right wrist, Marcus now wore a simple, thin band of brushed steel, not a Patek Philippe, not a status symbol, not a transmitter or a tracker or a proof of anything. Just a watch. Just a way of marking time. He had chosen it deliberately for its plainness, for the reminder it was meant to carry, that time is not an asset to be managed or a resource to be optimized, but a continuous and irreversible gift, moving in only one direction, asking only one thing. Pay attention. Be present. Reach for the things that matter with both hands and without hesitation, the way a child reaches, openly, completely unafraid. On the face of the watch, just above the 6, he'd had a single small word engraved by the watchmaker.
Lily.
Not as a monument, not as sentiment, as a note to himself, recurring, daily. Every time he checked the hour, a 3-year-old's one-word instruction, delivered without knowing she had given it, the whole lesson of the whole turning point of the whole changed life compressed into the name of a small girl with orange barrettes and a rabbit named Bunny, and the absolute, unshakable confidence to reach for whatever caught her eye. Because some things that look like accidents are really just grace in a form we weren't expecting. And some of the most important hands that have ever touched your life are very, very small. And